All right, so we're rolling. Well, thanks for joining us. And I'm sorry, I assume we say it Graham, or how do you say your first name?
It's Graeme.
Graham,
Yeah.
probably with rolling of the R's. Graham.
Yeah, the rolling of the R's.
So I actually speak a dialect of German that some of my ancestors spoke back in that region, and so I'm used to rolling my R's. So in our language, we do it a lot. So anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for agreeing to talk to me. Uh, I hope it's an interesting conversation. We learn something. You're somebody I've just been watching on Facebook, kind of a mutual friend. I think you have passion for the Lord and passion for the Bible, and so I just wanted to make contact and have a discussion. So thank you so much.
No, that's all right. I'm glad to be here.
So I guess tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, etc.
Yeah, well, I'm from Scotland, first of all, as you know already. I'm 30 years old. I've had an interest in Christianity since I've been about 16, 17-ish.
Okay.
So I wasn't really brought up as a Christian. So I had to someone had to spark my interest anyway, and to get me thinking, is God real? Is the Bible true and things? And from there, I just kind of studied around that age, 16, 17, to see whether these things were true, creation science. And, I studied a lot of things like, if you've heard of Kant Hovind and Answers in Genesis, I've studied into those sort of things. They were really helpful, those two.
Okay.
Helped me see the age of the earth was younger than what a lot of, like what the majority of secular science says. Of course, as you're familiar with Ron White's discoveries as well, that was really helpful for me too.
Sure.
And all this just kind of helped encourage me in my faith, especially as a young Christian, just coming to the truth then. And I just kept studying for myself. And today I believe what I believe, really.
Very interesting. So in your, so basically you didn't grow up a Christian, you didn't have that sort of background, and then you came to know the Lord. And then from what I understand, you're I believe an Adventist of some sort. I don't know how that all works in that world. I'm not from that world. My background is, it's kind of complicated, but I'm actually from what are known as Mennonites. Like my parents were actually Amish, which is a very conservative.
Oh, okay.
Whatever, they left before I was born, so I was never Amish myself. But we're from the Mennonites, but we're not part of that anymore. Basically, the congregation I attend is non-denominational, but that's kind of the where we come from. So Anabaptist kind of a background is where we would come from. But yourself, you obviously ended up at some point here with the Adventist, etc. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I started off with, I joined a Presbyterian church first when I was young, but then as I kept studying, I believed things like the Sabbath being on Saturday and other things, and just came to agree with the Seventh Day Adventists.
Okay, so I guess I've had conversations with Seventh Day Adventists just personally, but not actually recording it for YouTube. So what are some of the key things that you look at as being central in that movement?
Well, probably the first thing was, as I just mentioned there, the Sabbath. Most churches that we're aware of would go to church on Sunday. And for me at the time, I was in fact, when I was young, and not really thinking too much about that subject, I didn't think to myself, why is Sabbath now on Sunday? The church I had gone to, they view Sunday as the Sabbath, you see.
Yeah.
And, the denomination anyway. And eventually I did start studying into it more. And as I studied, I found in the scriptures there was nothing really indicating any change. And so for me, I want to keep the Sabbath on the proper day as best as I can. And that would probably be the first like major reason why I'd be a Seventh Day Adventist. Other things I came to change on, which was, it could have been even before the Sabbath point, but I started seeing the state of the dead subject differently. And then I started realizing, okay, you don't go to heaven and hell at death. You might see that differently, of course, but as a, from a Seventh Day Adventist perspective anyway, from what I'm seeing in the Bible, I'm seeing that when you die, you have to wait till Christ comes again to be given the gift of eternal life in heaven, really.
That would be, I think they call that soul, like the
soul
term
sleep.
Soul sleep. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be the term it's often used.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see other ones. I think early on, I would say as well, like I wasn't used to the idea coming from a Presbyterian background as well, to the whole idea of prophets. Of course, that's going to be controversial at first for me, because I was like, oh, okay. It kind of off-putting at first, but then as I studied into it, I came to agree with it. This is what the Bible teaches. You do have prophets after the cross. And as I've read her writings, I should say, I've not seen anything contradicting the Bible, and everything I've read actually supports the teachings in there. In fact, one of the other things as well that helps me is in that area is that the discoveries of Ron Wyatt, for me, they help to show that they're true as well, what Ellen White is saying. Some might say it's the other way around as well. Deciding what else I could mention. Probably the heavenly sanctuary teaching as well. Not many churches talk about Christ's ministry in heaven. Like I'm not just talking about the subject of 1844 in itself. I'll mention a bit more about that in a second. But the fact that Christ is high priest in heaven, like our mediator in heaven, not many churches talk about that. You hear mentions of Christ sitting in the right hand of God in heaven, but never just ministering on our behalf there. And in regards to the 2300 days, I know that's a controversial topic for a lot of people, non-Seventh Day Adventists, even ex-Seventh Day Adventists. But I believe that's a biblical teaching for 1844. And it revolves around dates, and we know, if we know who William Miller is, he was the one that came up with the date 1844. And his understanding was it was to do with Jesus's second coming. But then, of course, that didn't happen, of course. Like, we're still here today, of course. So, but the way we understand it is that it's actually to do with the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven, the most holy place there, instead of what William Miller would have understood it. And he believed it was the earth being cleansed. So, and that's found in Daniel 8:14. If you want to see where the whole idea of 2300 days came from.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Up quick.
Yeah, off the top of my head, that's probably the main points I can think of just now there.
So let me just get this over here. So the prophet or prophetess you were referring to is Ellen White. It's probably the foremost person in the movement. Is there others as well?
In Seventh Day Adventism, we officially only recognize one person having that gift of prophecy. There are other movements, like offshoots. that have claimed to have a new prophet, but like the mainstream Seventh Day Adventist Church, which I'm part of, we don't recognize any other prophets.
Okay. I'm just reading that here, so. Host, trample. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Very interesting. So now yourself, have you, so you mentioned Ron Wyatt, have you gone to any of the sites and looked at any of the things yourself?
I personally haven't been there myself yet. At some point, I hope to go. It would be a really good experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've not been in Turkey. I've not looked at the whole what do they call it, the Daripiner site or whatever it is. Haven't been there. My cousin's actually going to be there. I think in the next few weeks. He's actually meeting Andrew there to do more with it. But I've been to Arabia. I've been to Sinai in Arabia. I've been to where Ron would say the Gomorrah Sodom thing is. Spent a lot of time hiking down in those hills. I've also been out to Ashkelon where he found the burial pots, etc., and also been in Jerusalem, the Garden Tomb, where he did his excavations there. It's Ron is an interesting character. It brings up a lot of emotions when you talk about Ron Wyatt in the archaeological world, I guess you would say. I think it's kind of I would have heard about him when I was young, and my dad actually went and, he lived not that terrible far from us, probably 7-8 hours away. So my dad actually went and met him and talked to him and stuff before he passed away. But basically his videos were actually kind of the start of my interest in actually looking up biblical stuff and like, hey, this stuff actually exists. And it wasn't just, some boring archaeology. It actually made it kind of more interesting and exciting. So that's part of the drive for me to have gone to some of these locations. I just want to see it for myself, whether he was right or not. It wasn't that. It was just the issue of like, look, there's stuff to see here. We need to, why not look at it? Let's look at it. So I'm thoroughly convinced he was correct on Sinai. I'd probably say it a little bit different than some people would. He didn't discover it. He rediscovered it for the West. We did talk to some locals and some Bedouins, and, their traditions have been like, yeah, this is the mountain of Moses. It's been this way for, my great-grandfather, his great-grand. This has just been handed down to us. But because they're isolated from the Western world, there was no way for Westerners to really even have heard the stories from them because we couldn't get into the kingdom. So, but hats off to him for the nerve that he had and the guts to actually cross the border and test the theory. And then as far as the Sodom and Gomorrah stuff, there's no question. I think he's on to something. The exact locations, I don't know. Is several very distinct formations. The most obvious is the one at the base of Masada, which he talks about. As far as when I'm talking about formation, I'm talking about sites. So you have a change in the geology or the actual materials. So you go from a hard stone, and it literally is like a line in the sand. You're walking into a material that's the consistency of powder, and it has like this crust over it, and you break through, and you can tell that. It just changes. It's pretty dramatic difference. And in those formations is where you find the sulfur balls. And I found quite a few chunks of sulfur digging through that stuff. So that part, he was onto something. And I know that from subsequent, just trips and stuff, that you get to the same thing on the Jordanian side, on the peninsula that juts out from Jordan. They have it over there. There's a similar site at the north end of the Dead Sea. Not that I found sulfur. I've not really got off the road to look through that one, but I've driven past it many, many times, and it's the same type of formation. So kind of fits the whole biblical Admah, Sodom and Gomorrah, Zeboim, Zoar, stuff. So that I've looked through, to study it. And then of course the Ark of the Covenant thing, which is fascinating. And unfortunately, we don't know for sure because he was the only one to technically see it and for his discovery. But it's fascinating. So I guess we'll see and wait and see. I know Michael Rood. I don't know if you heard of Michael before or not.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, Michael in his videos claims to have gotten some more information as far as the entrance and how to get into the tunnel, etc., from a cooler storage thing there close to the parking lot, etc. It could easily be. I do know, for instance, we were just with COVID, it kind of blocks it off, but I've been trying to take one trip a year over and looking into stuff, but that in the Temple Institute, if you take the tour, the last station of the tour is, because you're going through all the things that they've built for rebuilding the temple, etc. The last station is the Ark of the Covenant. And in the tour, they say, well, we know where the Ark of the Covenant is, and we'll bring it out when the time is right. So who knows?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know. They could be thinking of Ron's claim there, maybe. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. It could be that they have the tunnel, they know how to get to it, and they'll bring it out when the time's right, or you just never know. I know the Ethiopian tradition, which is Bob Cornuke, he's got that tradition, but I also have a friend. Unfortunately, they just had a slaughter down there. Was it last year, earlier this year? It was terrible. A couple hundred people died. It's a bad deal. But supposedly a very rich friend of my friend paid a lot of money to go in there to see the Ark. And when he got into where the Ark was, there was nothing there. And then they're like, well, you won't see it unless you're supposed to. So
okay. Well, I didn't work with
he was like, well, I want my money back.
yeah. My first thought is, if it disappears for certain people, well, the Philistines and all that saw it when they were fighting Israel. So
yeah, I don't know, but it's fascinating. So as I understand, Adventist, Seventh Day Adventists are obviously Sabbath is a big deal, but it is a very eschatological tradition, very eschatologically focused. Is that fair to say?
I probably say so.
Yeah, I mean, you have a very distinct eschatological tradition that's very unique to, your expression of the faith.
I think so. Well, a lot of what we believe is to be we focus a lot on the books of Daniel and Revelation, with the prophecies of end times, and what we're expecting to happen. That's probably one of the things that's made us who we are really as a denomination.
Okay. Very good. Well, tell me a little bit more about just your journey as a whole and what you're seeing in Scripture and what's important to you. What do you think we as believers need to focus on? What is important for us?
Well, I think the most important thing we all need to focus on, the most important thing we need to focus on is the cross of Jesus Christ. And without Christ dying on that cross and rising again, none of us would have eternal life in the future. We'd all be lost in our sins. That's one of the most beautiful parts about why I like Ron Wyatt's claim about the Ark of the Covenant, because he talks about how the blood is on the mercy seat of the Ark, and that shows the whole heart and soul of the gospel. It's what took place that day, 2,000 years ago on the cross. We need to preach the fact that Christ died for us, give people hope that they can be forgiven and cleansed of their sins. Of course, I know that doesn't lessen the importance of other aspects of the Bible, like other teachings. You got to know about who God is, who Jesus is. Need to know he's the Son of the living God. you need to know about the Godhead, or I know like the whole Trinity topic's always a big debate for a lot of people, but I won't talk about that part.
Hey, why not? I
could do. I personally believe that like the Seventh Day Adventist Church officially believes in the a Trinity. It slightly differs from the Catholic understanding. When you see Catholic understanding, it seems like one being split into three forms. It seems like to me, at least that's the way it comes across as.
Persons. They're very strong on the whole persons. Three persons. Yeah.
And like in Seventh Day Adventism, like you've got like a split in Seventh Day Adventism on this. Officially, we believe, like we call it Trinity, and we call it like three co-eternal persons. Ellen White calls them all three of them beings. So I believe in that, like the official position. And then you've got the other side of the argument in this, even in the Seventh Day Adventist Church, where they say the Holy Spirit is not a person. Like, they basically trying to think of how to word their argument. Basically, it's just like the Father and the Son, and the Spirit is basically like an influence or power that emanates from them.
Like a force, basically. Yeah.
I think that's similar to how Jehovah's Witnesses consider that subject, I think.
Yeah. The Jewish traditions would be the same. Like in Judaism, of course, they wouldn't believe in Jesus, but as far as the Spirit is more of a force, or it's described as wind. So ruach is just wind. So it's like a force, not necessarily with an identity. For myself, I think any theological system to explain God is going to be rather tricky, because you're putting something that is so beyond our understanding in a human box, which I think is tricky. I would probably go with the whole, I understand the concept in our minds when we think of three persons, and I would say that's probably legit. But having said that, I would say I am more of the persuasion complex in unity. So his complexity is maybe these different manifestations or persons, but they are unified, being the primary primary function. So they form, that complexity, they form a singular unity. But I would hold to, Jesus, Son of God, Ben Elohim. I would hold to the Father. And I would hold to the Spirit, and I would probably, say the Spirit is an individual, rather than just a force, because he seems to have he speaks expressly of Christ, is what the Bible says, but he seems to have his own position or power or effect that is unique from what we would say is the Father and the Son.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I know it's hard to understand, we'll probably never fully understand this subject anyway, since it's about God. We don't understand this earth even.
Right, 100%. There's a lot we don't understand. Yeah. So in your mind, we can get on the subject of Sabbath.
Yeah.
And again, this is just to learn. So like my position is, our church is not a Sabbatarian church. However, having said that, it's not like we would be exclusively, we must meet on Sunday. Okay, so we do not think the Sunday is a hallowed day per se, but we just kind of take the position as Gentiles. It is what it is. We grew up in the systems we did. It's the day that everybody's used to meeting and talking about the Lord, but personal observance is a different story. So our church meets Sundays, individuals, that's a different situation. It's kind of the position, I guess you would say. As far as I know, most people would observe the rest period on Sunday. But there's some people that would, very few, but there's a few that would probably do it on Saturdays. But we get together on a Sunday morning. We did for a while on Saturday evenings, but it was a challenge. It's kind of a challenge to get the participation. So it is what it is. But as far as, so in your understanding, and this is just, again, I've only ever had really one long in-depth conversation with another Adventist. So I'm coming from I'm just questioning here. As I understand that, they tend to, or at least the central position is that if somebody is a Sabbath keeper, basically like the eschatology is eventually going to divide between Sabbath keepers and Sabbath breakers. That's kind of how I would understand it. And the beast system will enforce Sunday worship, not Saturday. And then those who are Saturday keepers, ultimately are the ones that are going to be persecuted against, compared to the Sabbath keepers. And eventually it comes down to a dividing line between Sabbath keepers and those who don't.
Yeah, that's how most Sound Adventists would see it.
Okay, how do you see it?
Yeah, I see it that way as well. Like if you look at Revelation, like if you look at the end time prophecies in Revelation, I think it's chapter 14, where it talks about the three angels' messages, and in the third angel's message, it talks about those who reject the mark of the beast. It talks about, here's the patience, I think it's 14:12, here's the patience of the saints, here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. So that's, a lot of people would look at that and think the opposite must be true. Those who are receiving the mark of the beast must be breaking the commandments of God. And it does, like, for me it makes sense, because those who are rejecting the mark of the beast, of course, are getting the seal of God in their foreheads. Those who receive the mark of the beast receive it in both forehead and in their hand. If we look back in Paul's letters in, I think it's Romans chapter 7, I'll have to have a quick look just to see what verse it was. Paul in Romans chapter 7, and it's verse 25. But throughout the chapter, he's talking about how he's struggling. His flesh is struggling against sin, the law of sin. But he knows that he should be obeying God, but he can't. His flesh is fallen into the law of sin. But in the last verse of that chapter 25, I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then with the mind, I myself serve the law of God, but with the flesh, the law of sin. So it's just interesting how the mind is linked to God's law in that sense. And then you've got the seal of God, and whether that's how most people would look at it in Adventism, I just think it's quite interesting.
And as I understand, the Adventists would basically say the Ten Commandments those are the most, like, not just the most important, those are kind of like the only laws that really, really matter per se.
Yeah, I would say like the feast days, Sound Adventists don't keep them. Like the majority, some are bound to keep them, but officially we believe that they've been done away with at the cross. Colossians chapter 2, verses 14 to 17 talks about the blotting out of handwriting of ordinances, and it talks about meat and drink offerings, and the Sabbath day is mentioned there, we believe, to be referring to the ceremonial Sabbaths and not the fourth commandment Sabbath. So the other thing that we do keep, so besides the Ten Commandments, it would be the clean and unclean diet. But of course, most Adventists would be vegetarian anyway, so it wouldn't necessarily apply in that sense. But if you do eat meat, it's recommended that you at least avoid the unclean foods like pork and shellfish.
And that was again something that Ellen White had put forward. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in Scotland, just in general, just a question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do people? I mean, how does it? I don't know how it is to be a believer in that country, but in general, how are you received with the beliefs and things that you have? People kind of leave you alone, or is there a lot of hostility? Is there pressure against worshiping the way you
As a
do?
Christian, yes, just in general, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, with Scotland being such a secular nation, it does make it a lot harder these days, I would say, because um, a lot of people in general start, like in these recent years, maybe last couple of decades or so or more, people don't like to be as open about their faith because they're scared of being mocked and criticized for their faith. Evolution and things like that.
yeah.
People are always like mocking us, and people. It's quite depressing actually when you think about it. But generally, like for me, I enjoy sharing my faith with people. One of the things I like to do is give out books and DVDs. So I try what I can anyway. But yeah, it's quite sad seeing how people are just not as interested in Christianity like they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, the UK as a whole
Yeah.
was quite the power base for Christianity, probably what 1700s on, at least for a time.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think I heard somewhere at one point that Scotland used to be considered God's country as well. So, but yeah, definitely not nowadays.
interesting. So secularism, I mean, here in the States, of course, you have a lot of it, but we have enough. Um, it's different because it all depends what part of the country you go to. Like here in the county that I live in, probably 75 to 80% of the people are church going. But then you can go to the next county and maybe 20% would be. But it just depends where depends where you live. But the overarching arching effect as a whole is drifting away from that worldview. I mean, most people would say we live in a post-Christian era, which I understand that from a
Mm.
um, governmental standpoint, where the Roman Church or whatever has a heavy hand in politics and government, etc. That side of it, I would agree with that. But in general, like I know I have some Italian friends, the Catholic Church is way more involved in the affairs there than here in the States. Like in the States, the Catholic Church has very little hold per se, because it was generally from a religious standpoint, it wasn't state churches. People were running away from that
Mm.
system. They left Europe because of that.
Mm.
Like my ancestors, if you will, Anabaptists, they fled Europe because of persecution, and came to the U.S. because of that. So as a whole, the U.S. has always been less hostile
Mm.
towards different expressions, probably than Europe.
Mm.
But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely going to be like from a Seventh Day Adventist understanding with the end time prophecies as well. Yeah, I'm sure you're probably aware of this already. But the United States, from our understanding of prophecy, will play a big role in enforcing the National Sunday Law, from what we believe, and that's what we would argue is the mark of the beast, of course. And I expect at some point, in fact, for the whole world as well, for the Western world and the Middle East and Asia as well, there's got to be a major change at some point to get everyone to start enforcing a religious law in these last days. And, with how society is becoming so secular. So whether this is going to be just down to climate change, with green Sabbath, don't know. But, I do believe that we're going to experience a lot of should I describe it as false miracles from Satan in these last times. And whether this is brought on after the first laws are being enforced about it. And then we've got Ron Wyatt's claim about the Ark of the Covenant, and the world gets to see that. Like, I'm not sure if there's going to be a combination of things happening that will convince the world that Jesus Christ is real. We have to create religious laws. You've got to have something that convinces the Islamic world, Buddhists, Hindus, all sorts of religions will have to recognize that the God of the Bible is true, and they see the need for Sunday, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding of eschatology, I mean, I can see.
Yeah.
So the way I would understand it is,
Yeah.
Of course, it's evolving. Everybody who studies eschatology has a drift that goes on throughout their lifetime. They slowly drift, to different aspects that they understand. But as I would understand it, you're going to have something is going to
happen,
seemingly have a ecumenical effect. So there's, whatever it is, I know there's some people that are, Islam, what do they call it? Islam, basically that, it'll be as Islam and an Islam-based thing, or some people say it's a Catholic thing, or some people say it's a, new religion, or some people say could be Judaism to a degree. And there's this all sorts of speculation. But as I see it, there seems to be a fusion of those. So you're mixing bits and pieces of all of it, because you really have three Abrahamic religions that you're dealing with. So Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They're all Abrahamic. And so I don't know that, the Antichrist is going to be mixing, for instance, Eastern religions, that sort of stuff. I don't think that's what's going on. I think he's dealing with the Abrahamic world. Personally, I think the prize is the Davidic throne. So what he's after is Jesus' throne in Jerusalem, and to replicate the effects of what is predicted to happen. So I do believe in a millennium. I do believe in Jesus returning and ruling on earth. I do believe in resurrection. I believe all of that stuff. But I do believe that just before he returns, he sets up a false scenario in which it will look like the Messianic era has come. So signs and wonders, seemingly prosperity, before God turns the tables on the whole system. And part of that, I think, is that religious unity, and and in that situation, it could very well be that a kind of a Sabbath kind of a deal could be at the middle of the whole thing. So in your mind, as an Adventist, I'm not an Adventist. I mean, technically, I'm not part of the church. So in your mind, you would probably say, based upon the conversation I have with the other person, that I can be a Christian, and God can wink at people who, know the truth, whatever, and don't do that for a season. But ultimately, in your mind, if I know to do the right thing and I don't do it, that I would be living in sin and would potentially face damnation because of knowing the truth and not living it. Would you? I mean, that may be too pointed a question. I understand. I'm not trying to corner you. I'm just asking, just because of the conversation I had with the other person. I don't know how you feel about it.
The way I would look at it is that, like, if you've been convicted and know the truth now, and you don't act upon it, I think that's when the sin comes in. Because if you read Hebrews chapter 10, I think it's verses 26, 27, it talks about, for if you willfully sin after having received the knowledge of the truth, that's when, I can't remember exact wording, but basically you have no forgiveness of sins or sacrifice for sins, it says, if we're willingly sinning, that is. Can't remember exact wording, but it's something like that.
Yeah. And I understand it's a tricky one. I'm not trying to corner you with that. I was just curious what your opinion was.
Yeah.
I would understand it. So the way I understand it very, Jesus didn't come, this is just my understanding, Jesus didn't come to overturn the Sinai covenant in the sense, because there was more going on. As I understand it, Jesus obviously was a Jew. He was born in the Davidic line. He was born of, in the house of David and of the tribe of Judah. And he never went against his family heritage. So he was always a Jew. He remained a Jew, etc. And I think he comes back as one too, just because of all the prophecies. Now, I don't hold to replacement theology, so I don't believe that somehow the church has replaced Israel and God's promises, etc. I would rather hold to something more of a, I'm careful to use the word because I haven't studied what people claim in this, but I've heard it kind of makes sense. Is the whole Ephesians part of the commonwealth? So we as Gentiles being grafted among natural branches, kind of a deal. But that we also, of course, are people of God. But like the discussion in Acts 15 says, since we were alien from the covenants, since we're alien from the promises, since we're alien from all that stuff, God's expectation for Gentiles isn't the same, or wasn't the same, as for Jews. So for instance, me as a Gentile coming into believing in Messiah, believing in Jesus, the Sinai or Sinaitic laws, covenant, was an external one. We understand that. Doesn't necessarily mean now I have to become circumcised or I have to become Jewish to believe in Jesus. You can be a Gentile and remain so. And Acts 15 seems to support that concept and actually encourage it, that from Gentiles, they're not supposed to become Jewish. They're not supposed to really become circumcised and follow Torah, etc. in that stance. At least, that was their consensus then. So I hold the concept that if somebody wants to meet Saturdays, great. If somebody wants to meet Sundays, great. There's no burden on that. If you're a Jew or a Messianic, it may be different. There might be different responsibility based on the Sinai covenant, but as a Gentile, not so much. But that's just my view. It's how I understand it. But that might make you squirm.
No, it's. I think that's quite a normal view, actually, from what I've heard. I think, like from my perspective, I would probably view, like, you don't have to be circumcised and things, of course. Like, Gentiles don't need to be circumcised. I think that most Seventh Day Adventists would probably view that spiritual Israel would probably be the main Israel of today. I would say, like, they would be more focused on the church rather than the literal Israel, if you know what I mean. So they would probably be more about the replacement. I don't like saying replacement theology in that sense, but but it's pretty much that, isn't it?
It is.
Yes, yeah. But basically, when it comes to the Sabbath point, Adventists view that the Sabbath has been for everyone from the start of creation all the way till today. So it's for them, for us. It's for Gentile and Jew.
Yeah, I understand the argument. I would differ with it because it wasn't instituted until the Sinai covenant was given. However, like Paul says, that it is for each person to decide what to do. As far as when I don't ever tell a Sabbath keeper, you don't have to keep Sabbath. If that's what God has instructed them with, I encourage do what God tells you. I have a friend I've actually made recently who's in the whole Worldwide Church of God movement, which is kind of like Adventism. I think it's Herbert Armstrong, whatever. I think that was the founder. Anyway, so we've had a lot of conversations about it as well, and they're actually in a lot of ways stricter than Adventists would be. So they would still be keeping the feasts and all that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah, I don't know much about them. I've not really looked into them.
Yeah, they're very similar. But they would actually be somewhat stricter, so they would still do the feast, etc.
Interesting.
But of course, I have Messianic friends as well, Messianic Jews. My biggest, generally, my biggest, thing to, at least in the other conversation I had, not on the YouTube, but just in person with the other person that was Seventh Day Adventist, is the consistency aspect. So I understand the principle of seventh day But at the same time, if you're going to be dogmatic about that one thing, there was a lot more to Sabbath keeping than what I would see Seventh-day Adventists doing, namely the amount of distance you're allowed to go on the Sabbath day, the lighting of fires, the type of preparation, the opening of doors. There was a lot more legal criteria for how to practice that. So why, okay, so setting aside the day is good, of course, it's not bad, but then why not that other stuff?
I think the way we generally view it, like we try and keep it as best as we can. At least me personally, anyway. The way I view, I'm trying to think of the right word. Like it's more about things that are unnecessary. We try to avoid as best as we can. Like if you've got like cooking to do and things, we try and do that, or at least as simply as possible if we do any cooking. Where like some people talk about how you shouldn't even turn the light switch on and things like that. And it's like, I'm not sure of anyone that actually does that, but I'm not
Orthodox do.
Yeah, but I'm just like, no, we just try our best not to do things that's totally unnecessary. Like you don't have to go and eat out in a restaurant and things that's necessary to get to church and things. We do that. Like if it's a thing that you're doing for God, like if you go out to evangelize on the Sabbath, if you go out, if you need to start your car and drive to church, do that. If there's emergencies that you have to do as well, I'm okay with that as well. If there's something, say if someone falls ill, I'm happy with someone going to an emergency hospital, but
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Now, just curious, and I've done a little bit of research, enough to be dangerous, but just curious on your thoughts of this. One of the things that I've been looking into, again, I've not done enough research to have a conclusive opinion on it, but Michael Root is a big proponent of the temple calendar, which scripturally speaking was different than modern day calendars. It's not like it was a lunar calendar that was agriculturally and astronomically corrected. So every year, the first day of the year had to do with the barley being Aviv and the first sliver of the new moon. So from that point forward, you then started to count. So the first day of the year was when you said the first sliver of the new moon and the barley being Aviv. That's how you mark the first day of the year. So from then on, you would then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So potentially, and this is where I don't know for sure, I have to do a little more research, but potentially, as I understand it, the Sabbath could potentially have actually moved forward or backwards according to our calendars, not according to that calendar, because it was being corrected for the cycles that God had instructed them. But according to our calendars and our reckoning of time, it could have bounced around forward a day, back a day, etc., depending on when the barley and the moon were sighted. So if that was the case, I'm not saying it was, because again, I need to do more research, but if that was the case and the date actually did bounce around a bit, not on that calendar, but on our calendars, because ours are solar calendars, like if that's the case, you could make an argument that the date that we're setting aside as the 7th or the Shabbat or Sabbath might actually not be the Sabbath according to the temple calendar.
I think for me anyway, the lunar cycle for the calendar, from what I've studied, I haven't studied really deep into it though. I've only briefly looked at it. So I can't tell you too much about it, sadly. But from what I've understood, the cycle of the week, or the order of the week, like Saturday and Sunday, hasn't changed. I think I read somewhere that astronomers were asked about that as well, and they claim that the days of the week hasn't changed.
Yeah, I understand that. I just had a discussion with the Messianic about it, and he brought that
Yeah.
up. The problem is it
Yeah.
wasn't just astronomical; it was also agricultural. So you'd have to simulate the barley becoming a beeve to actually make the astronomy work. It's not just astrological math. You'd actually have to figure out exactly which day the barley became a beeve, because it was the conjunction of those two that marked the first day of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's definitely a very interesting subject, that one anyway, about the lunar. I think one of the things we'd have to try and explain is from the early, like a lot of the early church, you had your split between Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, sure.
Not all Sunday, like most, I can't say all Sunday people. A lot of Sunday Christians today argue that Sunday is the first day of the week, the day Christ rose to life. They seem to believe that.
Yeah, eighth day, basically. Yeah.
And then you've got your Judaism. They still they argue they keep the original Sabbath as well.
Sure.
And Seventh Day Adventists, of course, argue this is the same Seventh-day Sabbath that we can. I think they can. I'm certain I've read something that we can be certain that this is the same Sabbath that Jesus himself kept, but I don't know the argument behind that, to be honest.
It's normally has to do with the division, so it's being able to astronomically divide. But if you follow what the Torah instructed, that's the part that how do you simulate when the barley was a beeve for thousands of years? Because you had to have both to mark the beginning point. It wasn't just when the sliver of the new moon appeared, it was a sliver of the new moon in conjunction with the barley being a beeve. Because what happened is occasionally it wasn't ready, so it pushed it forward a month. So basically it corrected the whole cycle. And like the Jewish calendar today, again, it's Babel. That was kind of created in Babylon, where they couldn't do the whole temple calendar thing. So it's a version of, or it's not according to Torah. And the same thing is with, of course, I'm not a fan of the Gregorian calendar at all because of the paganism and names associated, but it is what it is. It's the calendars we use today, but I'm not a fan of that. I look at it. See, I would look at what we do Sundays as far as resting as seriously as what you do on Saturday. I'm pretty intentional about resting. It is a day of rest, and it needs to be a day of rest. I don't look at it necessarily as a religious, I must do this in the sense of Torah obedience, because I do believe that as a Gentile, number one, it wasn't asked of me to become Jewish, but secondly, we know that Jesus is our Sabbath. He is the fullness of Sabbath. Not that he gives me an eternal vacation here. I'm still working. But the fact that he is the fulfillment of what it was pointing to, which is I think really ultimately points to 1,000 years. But anyway, now would Sabbath Day Adventists hold to that, like Chiliasm or the 1,000-year millennium, etc.?
We do believe in the 1,000-year millennium, but we don't believe it's on, I know there's different theories about it, but we believe that it's not going to be on earth that Christ reigns, but it'll be in heaven. So he'll come here again at the start of the 1,000 years, and then we'll go up to heaven during that period, and then we'll come back again at the end of it.
What happens on earth during that period?
Basically, we believe that during that 1,000-year millennium, the earth is left desolated. And basically, that scripture in Revelation where it says Satan is bound for that 1,000 years? Yeah, basically he is left on a desolated earth for that 1,000-year period. And then at the end of that millennium, when we come back, he's let loose. And that's when from my understanding anyway, the wicked are resurrected again. And that's when Satan deceives all the wicked again to attack the New Jerusalem.
New Jerusalem being then built at the 1,000-year mark, or?
Basically at the end of it, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
I do personally think, I wouldn't say it's a dogmatic thing, but I would say it's my opinion is that New Jerusalem's being built as we speak, even, in heaven.
Okay. Yeah.
I think there's a verse somewhere, I think it's John 14, and where it talks about I go to prepare a place for you. But I don't know. It's one of those interesting points in millennium. I've had a friend who believed in the earthly millennium. In fact, I think there are church denominations that do teach that Christ will reign on earth for 1,000 years. I'm not sure if it's Mormonism or something like that.
Anybody that's most dispensationalists or premillennialists, I think statistically like 30% of evangelicals would hold to that kind of a concept.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty good swath of people, including myself. I would hold to that.
Yeah.
Just because that was the expectation of, as I understand it, that was the expectation of the apostles. But basically, it doesn't matter to me whether it's in heaven or not, etc. Just out of curiosity, like, where do you think heaven is?
That's a hard one to describe. I know Paul talks about how he knew a man caught up in the third heaven, but how to describe where that third heaven is exactly? Like I would say up there, but
yeah, sure. Everybody. Heaven.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's a hard one to explain. I don't know how to describe that one.
So I have a theory. Maybe it's a bad theory, but my theory is, I've not really heard anybody talk about it. I'm sure there's people that have this sort of a concept out there, but my theory is that basically, so in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and the earth was void, formless, darkness from the face of the deep, and then the Spirit God divided the waters from the waters, and then God also put a firmament in the heavens. In Revelation and other places, we actually hear about that crystal sea. So what seems to have happened is that when God threw us out of Eden, which is paradise, there was a part of us that were veiled from seeing into the full reality of what exists. So we can see maybe in 3.5 dimensions, etc., but we can't see the spirit world, which we know exists because God is spirit and he dwells in it, and there's also evil spirits, etc. So there is a spirit world or an unseen realm that exists. Don't know, is that dimensional? Is that elevation? Is that, how that works? I don't know. Metaphor in the temple to me seems to indicate what is going on, and that is that you have like the outer court. It is the realm of the earthly heaven. It's where we do our service. It's the visible realm. Then as you go into it, you go through a veil, and then the holy place it's partitioned on both sides. So from the holy place, you're still not in the Holy of Holies, but you're also not in the visible realm. So it seems to be a place that is between two realms. And then you keep going. Of course, you have the veil with the embroidered cherubs, which obviously indicate throne room, because cherubim are throne guardians. And that veil then leads into the place where God dwells. I think if you take the tabernacle and just stack it vertically, that's what's going on. So you have the visible realm, there's a veil, and a interdimensional, sorry to use that term, but that's just using human logic to try to figure this out, an interdimensional second heaven that divides third heaven from first heaven. And then God dwells in the third heaven. So he's up behind the veil where the cherubs are at. Now, how I connect that, this is my theory, is that if you read about, number one, in the Garden of Eden, God placed cherubs or cherubim to mark, or a cherub to block the way into Eden after he threw man out. Well, that being the case, what was the throne guardian doing blocking entrance into paradise? Why a throne guardian? Why not another angel? Why was it a throne guardian? Well, my opinion is that perhaps Eden is actually where God is. It is the paradise of God. The Septuagint actually translates the Garden of Eden as paradisios, which is paradise. And that Jesus, obviously having known the Septuagint, when he was with the thief on the cross, he said, "This day you will be with me in paradisios." And Paul, when he talks about the third heaven, in that same thing says, which is the paradisios of God, which is the same language you get in Genesis. God planted a garden in Eden. So it's known as the Garden of the God, or Garden of God. So the garden was a segment of Eden, which is paradise, but not the full of it. So paradise seems to be a realm that in Revelation is described as 1,500 miles square. That's built on 12 foundation layers that resembles step pyramids.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. Step pyramids.
Yeah. Well, think about it. 12 foundation stones. They all lead up to the city.
Yeah.
Well, we always think foundation stones like the way we build buildings, which is like subterranean or whatever. Well, foundation stones to an ancient builder or an ancient temple in that time frame, the early time frame, where they were all step pyramids.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting.
Anyway, that's my theory.
I never thought about it that way.
It's my theory. It's just a theory. But the one clue I think that's actually quite compelling is that the tree of life is in paradise of God. And in Revelation, Jesus says, to him that overcomes, he will grant the right to eat from the tree, which is in paradisios, the paradise of God. So, in other words, the tree never disappeared. It never went anywhere. It's still right where it was at. And that he will grant us access to eat from it again. So, to me, the heavens seem to be referring to the division, the realms, and then heaven, as we would understand, or paradise, is where God is. But,
yeah. It's definitely interesting. Going to be with the restoration of the tree of life to us. It's getting back to that. I'll call it the Eden privilege or something like that. It's definitely interesting. I know as well the tree of life itself. It's represents the life giver in a sense. Of course, God is that life giver. If we remember Moses on Mount Sinai, he went, was it 40 days without water and food? Usually after 3 days or so without water, you die.
Well, and he was energized in a sense that when he came down, he was glowing.
Yeah. So, and it's also interesting as well when you see Revelation, when it talks about, they don't need any use of the sun there. Because God is that light. And if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, God said let there be light, and he did that before he created the sun. I still believe there will be a sun on earth, but it didn't have to be like in the new earth. But I know God is that light. It matters.
100%. I look at that the way it describes light, and I think light is the technically correct way of saying it. But based on science, I would translate light as energy. And the reason I would say that, and that it is somewhat synonymous, is that what we understand in the scientific realm, especially quantum physics, etc., and even just biological, whatever, go down to the atomic level, you'll note that everything is energy. So, an atom is neutron, proton, electron. It's just an energy molecule. And the mass of an atom is, as I understand it, and I'm not a physicist or a scientist, but as I understand it, the mass of an atom is 99 point greater. I'm not sure exactly, but it could be 99 or 92 or whatever. The mass of an atom is essentially nothing. It is literally, it's just moving energy. So at the molecular level, everything we see is powered by energy. So the framework for the universe is, from the scientific understanding, is energy. Well, then you hear in Genesis that God first created light. Well, we all know that light is energy. Okay, but of course the Hebrew writers correctly say light, not energy, because I think light is actually what's going on. But it is actually, I believe, that God is actually powering the universe. That, in a sense, his because technically the mass of the universe is nothing. And I heard a conversation that Chuck Missler was having, a friend of his who was a physicist, was saying that we need to start getting used to the idea that the world or creation or the universe is more of an idea than a material reality, because when you get down to it, there's no mass to it. It is just energy. Well, so if you understand, when God said he created the world, he created light, it's like, I can understand that. I can understand that God is, he created the energy for the universe. And in some ways, not going to say this is just me imagining it here, but in some ways we exist in his mind, and that his mind is actually what's powering this whole thing. You could use that analogy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've never thought of it like the physics side of things, quantum physics and all that. I'm like, okay, lost. But
just think energy now. Well, think about it, how we're made. So we're made in the image of God. So we have brains, and when we have an idea, what is that idea? It's a pulse of energy. So there's a little electrical current that goes up into whatever, and whatever part of the brain fires off, and it's just an electrical signal that we now translate as to a thought. Oh, this is what happened, and it actually does something. Well, what if God? I don't know how he looks. None of us do. But what if God, literally, he spoke the word, or he thought the word, or however he speaks, and it was that this whole thing is just in his imagination, which is still tangible, but it could just simply reside in his mind.
Yeah, so definitely something I've never thought about.
It could be. I don't know. Some people say I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm just, I know enough about science to be dangerous. So,
like, I know from my view anyway, like I know I'm here. Like I know I'm
100%
here anyway. Yeah.
Nice biomechanical suit.
Yeah. Yep. But that side of stuff, no idea.
Yeah. Anyway, good conversation, I guess. Now, I enjoy that stuff because to me, like science, so it is the world we live in. People go by science and people all that. Well, you can leverage science to explain what Scripture is saying. So, like for instance, the whole God created light, then He created things that make light. So the principle of light existed before the actual manifestation of light. Yeah. So the principle of light, we know that light is energy. So you get an oscilloscope and you put, you can look at light and you see the energy waves. Yeah. So energy is, I think, what I was talking about.
Yeah. Well, we see how sunlight, with the energy like that has with it, how it affects our plants. We see how it affects, even our what we build with our hand. Like if you have a car and all that, you see the roof gets all like the paintwork gets all UV. Awful.
Yeah, sure. Well, see, my hypothesis, and me and my ideas, but I have fun with this because I do enjoy science. But for instance, there's a verse in the Bible, and I keep referencing it, but I don't have. Let me just see if I can find it here. Talks about when he took the fire out of Satan. Let me see if I can find it here quick. And the reason I think that's interesting yes. I think 28:18. Let me just see here. Ezekiel 28:18. Let's see here. So, which translation do you prefer?
I've got King James beside me just now, so
that's perfect. We'll do that.
So we can easily look for that.
I just call that the King Jimmy translation.
King Jimmy. Jimmy's one of the nicknames for James. So.
Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitudes of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore, I will bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. So this, therefore, I will bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. Let me just look at the Hebrew here real quick. So, Yatsah, ish, basically to go forth, to come out of. Ish. Sever. So from the midst or within, whatever. Boy. Cool. Oh, from himself. So basically, yeah, you could translate it that way. So basically, bringing the fire out of him. So I brought out so I brought fire out of your midst. It consumed you, and I turned you to ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. So anyway, think about it this way. So what if this God created in us, and this is something that Doug Hamp talked about, Dr. Hamp, I interviewed him a couple weeks ago, but he's an interesting character, very knowledgeable. But he, there's others that have said this too, that, there seems to have been a different energy source within life. So Satan here is described as having fire within him, and God's going to take that fire out of him. Mankind, which lived by the trees of Eden, notice, in Genesis, it doesn't say that he lived by the plants, he lived by the trees. It was only after he was expelled that he lived by the plants, but before he lived by the trees. I think as I read between the lines, there might have been a different energy source in humanity that would have kept us going. So in other words, right now we have to metabolize food, and our body has to turn that into energy. But we still don't get enough energy out of our diet, in which we don't need sleep and to whatever. So what if we had a different energy source that left us? Maybe it was light, and it developed us and energized us. And when they sinned, they saw they were naked, and they wouldn't have seen that before. So they darkened or whatever, and they could see themselves, and they needed clothing, etc. What if that was part of it, and then God banishing them, saying, well, you're going to eat of the plants because that'll be your fuel, but you're going to die. In other words, losing that energy source, or losing that fire, or losing that light, whatever. Of course, the Bible doesn't say that we had it, but it could easily be, caused us to get out of his presence, because we see that when Jesus comes back, it says the plagues that he smites them with, like the skin melting off the bodies, and eyes melting in the sockets, etc. So the brightness of his appearing literally will evaporate people, as I read scripture. So if that's the case, we can't live in God. His glory is so bright and so all-consuming, so energizing, that it would just obliterate a fallen vessel like ourselves. But
yeah, well, I know, like, Christ talks about the need for the robes of righteousness.
Yeah, sure.
We need to have
something to cover us.
Wedding garment. Yeah, I think it's a wedding garment I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
But one of the things as well, it's interesting, like you're talking about that verse from Ezekiel talks about Satan. Well, it talks about him turning into ashes, like from a fire. And for me, it reminds me of the whole lake of fire in the book of Revelation, like where Satan and the wicked and the fallen angels are thrown in, and that's the second death.
Yeah.
I know there's another verse in Revelation, I can't remember where to find it. Talks about fire and brimstone as well being right. It's kind of like a repeat of Sodom and Gomorrah in a way.
Sure. Yeah.
And it is interesting as well, because I believe these wicked at that time will be turned to ash, because of what Malachi, I think it's Malachi chapter 4, verse 3, I think it is. 4:3. It's probably best to read the whole thing, actually, like 1 to 3.
There shall be ashes under the soles of your feet. Yep.
Yeah, because that seems to be talking about the second coming, like going by the context, like 1 to 3 anyway.
Yeah, let me find the whole other one
Yeah.
here.
So I am wondering as well, is that fire caused from, like, for Satan out of the midst of him, is that from burning sulfur hitting him?
I don't know. I would understand it, that the plague that I'm trying to find the verse here real quick. The plague that he smites the inhabitants in those days is the brightness of his appearing.
Yeah.
His glory literally just evaporates, because at this point, or at that point, as I understand it too, Satan is out of heaven. He no longer he can exist in that realm. And so when that brightness appears, it doesn't, he can't stand up to it.
Yeah. Like, it is an interesting topic anyway. I think because there is a verse talks about being destroyed. I think it's Paul speaking somewhere. Could be Thessalonians or something like that. It talks about being destroyed by the brightness of his coming. And but of course I do.
2:8, and then the wicked shall be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, or the breath of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. That's the one I'm referencing.
Yeah. Yep. Like, the way I picture that, I imagine that's his second coming at the start of the millennium. Like for like from my understanding, and then we're in heaven. And during that millennium, we're of course looking through the judgment books, the records, and that's when we come back, and that's when the wicked are judged, like punished. And that would probably be when the fire and brimstone would rain down upon them. So it could be a bit of both. Like I imagine, because Satan has to be chained upon the earth for 1,000 years, after Christ's second coming, he must not be destroyed by his coming.
See, the way I would understand the eschatology, so this is always, I always look at, like, okay, there's major points and then there's minor points, and everybody, eschatological discussion tends to hang up on exactly how Jesus is going to come, which is very difficult to
there's so many details.
Well, there's so many details that come together, and it's very hard to chronologically get them perfect. Okay, but we know the events are going to take place. But the major themes, as I understand it, I would hold to more of a Jewish apocalyptic understanding of it, which is basically God, the whole concept is heaven and earth were divided because of sin. The way the first century Jews and Second Temple period Jews understood that is that God was going to do that to again reunite heaven and earth. What I mean by reunite is that the realms can coexist without being needed to be divided. So have heaven fully visible to the earth and vice versa. So that's the picture in Revelation, as far as New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, prepared, as a bride. It's this concept of, in paradise, God has been building his city, his beautiful city, which I would hold to the idea that our spirits do go to be with the Lord to paradise, but are coming back. And the reason for resurrection is actually to make us visible in the visible.
Okay. Yeah,
that's my personal opinion. And some of that is based off of things that Paul says. It's also based off of Jesus in the parable of Lazarus in the tomb. He saw Abraham and they had a conversation. Now, it was a parable, but in the mind of Jesus, these people were still alive even though they weren't. So in the story, he's presenting it, and I know you could say it different ways.
Yeah,
I understand it. He was presenting it as though they were alive. So the spirit of the one was in Hades, or as the Old Testament Sheol, and the other one was in Abraham's bosom, or a place of delight. So one was being comforted and one was in torment. I would understand that to be Hades or hell, and the other paradise. Now, we do read that there is going to be a new heavens, new earth. So God, to an extent, is going to redo this, and that will be done after the final judgment. And the final judgment, the language is Gehenna. So the fires of Gehinnom, which is actually the Hinnom Valley outside of Jerusalem, that is the metaphor. I mean, Gehenna is that valley, the valley of Topheth, valley that's out front there. I've been through the valley several times. It's kind of creepy, not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never actually seen any photos of the place, I don't think. Maybe I have and I've forgotten.
If you stay at the Mount Zion Hotel, you stay right at the head of that valley, and you look down over the valley. But that's where all the trash was burned from the city, and it was also the place where a lot of the worship of Molech and Ashtaroth was taking place. There's also some there, so it's just a demonic place.
Yeah, interesting.
When Jesus talks about Gehenna, to those living in Jerusalem, they understood completely. Oh, that place. That's where the unrighteous dead go. Regardless of if our spirits go to be with the Lord as we wait for resurrection or not, I do affirm resurrection. I do not hold to the Platonic concept of heaven, where we're disembodied spirits floating in an ethereal paradise.
Yeah.
I don't hold to that. I hold to we are physically resurrected. God's intention is not for us to be disembodied spirits. His intention is us to be body and spirit.
Yeah, that's one thing that we can both, like me from my soul sleep perspective and you from your perspective as well. We can both agree in the resurrection having to happen.
100%. God's plan is not how would you say it? It's not fulfilled. It's not like his intention for mankind is not fulfilled until we're resurrected. I think all that is a regeneration. So God has to let us go down to the building blocks in which he, made us. So we were made of dust, but the dust got corrupted. So the dust has got to go back to dust so that he can remake us.
Remake us.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Paul talks about us having a new body, like unto Christ, a glorified body.
Yep.
So that will be exciting, like our imperfect bodies is what we've got just now, and it's won't die again and won't get ill.
That's awesome. Well, we've got a few minutes left here. What are some final things you'd want to mention to? I don't even know my followers. I have, I'm getting close to 1,000 now, which, the first 1,000 they say is the hardest. So I'm not really intentional about trying to get tens of 20s of 30,000 people. It's not really my goal, but what I'm after is more just having good conversations with people around the world that are fellow believers, that love Jesus, they love truth, they love, and are willing to, in their world, like the places they live, they're going through things. They're facing challenges. They're facing persecution. They're facing ridicule and scorn for their faith. And I just want to hear those stories. I want to hear where people are at and what they're going through and what they believe. So from what I've seen with your posts, you're a very passionate individual in a country that doesn't seem to treat you very kindly.
My greatest desire in my life anyway is to simply share the gospel, and that for me it's the greatest privilege in my life, I think, to be able to share the word of God with people. I just try and share with whatever tools I believe God has given me, whether it's through giving away just booklets or tracts, DVDs about the discoveries of Ron Wyatt. I try and do what I can anyway to just attract someone's interest in God. And I know at the end of the day it's not what I myself can do as well, but it's it's what God can do, and if he can use me in any way, I'll be very happy to be part of that.
Yeah, man. Well, one of these days you need to go with Andrew and explore some stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to check out the sites. It would be very exciting to just see, go to Turkey and see Noah's Ark. go to Sodom and Gomorrah, which you were talking about earlier, see sulfur balls.
Yep.
That would be pretty awesome to see. See Mount Sinai as well. And go to not just see a garden tomb. I'd like to see quite a few places in Israel as well. See all these places mentioned in the Bible.
The Garden Tomb is really a very special place. It's it just is. It's, you go to the traditional site, and I call it the I'm not trying to be sacrilegious, but I call it the tomb of the or the Church of the Unholy Sepulchre. It just
because it's not because that one's not it's just the man-made tradition one.
It's a tomb, and who knows, but the atmosphere in the Garden Tomb versus the traditional site is night and day. It is completely different atmosphere. Of course, all the it is what it is. I don't know. We can't say if archaeologically which one is what, but both of them existed in the first century. And to me, even if it wasn't the tomb, of course, the tomb isn't the whole point. The point is the tomb's empty. But the atmosphere at that site is just dramatically different. It's just different. It feels different. It feels there's joy when you go there, and the people that are there singing, etc. Versus you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and people are going in there on their hands and feet, and they're laying their DVDs, and they're what do you call it? Souvenirs and stuff, and they're laying them on the stone that supposedly prepared the body, and kissing it, and like crying over it and stuff. It's just like, that's idolatry. Like Jesus never said to lay things on sacred stones. It just like, where does this stuff come from?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons as well that the Ark of the Covenant hasn't been restored to Israel, in the past when it was taken away, because they're guilty of looking more to the Ark than to God, and the temple. They were worshiping the temple itself, and their sins, and just seeing how they treated the temple as well. Even in when Jesus's first advent was here, he had to chase the merchandisers, the money changers at the temple, and you can only imagine trying to do that in churches these days. So he'd be arrested now.
Well, you'll probably be happy to know. So our church is completely run by volunteers. Even our ministry, there's no paid ministry there.
But like I know, like when you go to some famous churches, like here in Scotland, they have shops built into them. And there's one in Edinburgh, which is where the Greyfriars Church. I was so sad when I saw what they were selling in there. Selling the Harry Potter books.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. I was like, oh, that's totally something that the Covenanters, they're of the Reformed faith, they would have just been sick.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, that's some dark stuff. To me, a lot of that's the stuff behind, or the purpose behind. If you look at just media in general, movies, books and things, the occult and the
it's all glorified, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's desensitizing even believers. I think it's all part of building up to the great delusion that will be. And I look at, so Jesus warns in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse, in most of the Gospels, he uses the term pseudo-Christos, which is false Christ. So only in the book of John where we read anachristos, which is antichrist. So I think it's technically probably, you can use both terms, but there's no question that he will be a messianic figure, and will try to sway people. And I think getting people used to the concept of reintroducing what was in the old times, like hybrids, the whole half God, half man hybrids, in our culture, that's Superman, or I don't know how it is in the UK, but around here, the films would be like is it Marvel? I think Marvel
Oh, the Marvel series,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. All those figures, superhumans, that stuff. That's all based on legends. I mean, I'm not saying the content, but I'm saying the principle is
Mm,
based on the legends of old. So the
yeah, like
mythology,
Thor and all that. Yeah,
mythology.
I have seen that movie Thor and all that, like the first one, and maybe a second one. But no, I can imagine people looking at things like that, and it's all taking it from paganism, really.
Yeah, yeah. But I think, well, it comes ultimately from Sumer and the Sumerian religion that was formed in the early days there that Abraham was taken out of. But the
Mm,
the concept, I think, is preparing people for that reality again. I
yeah,
think pseudo Christo or Antichrist, whatever, is probably a hybrid. He's
yeah.
probably he's given all the authority that Satan has. He's given all the power that he has. He is like the embodiment of the
Mm,
enemy. And I think that what the world is going to witness is kind of a rebirth of that whole system.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely. I can imagine that being anytime soon. Anyway, it looks like
Oh,
the
we're right
world.
there. We're messing
Yeah.
with people scientifically. There's, genetic modifications going on
Mm.
um, with living beings and animals and plants, and
Oh yeah,
wouldn't take that much to start messing with humans. So,
yeah, yeah. Don't have long left anyway. It's got to be close to the times of the Great Flood and no and Sodom and Gomorrah
yeah,
times.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It's been a fun conversation.
No,
And
I
yeah,
appreciate
been
it.
fun.
It's good to talk and exchange ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So say hi to anybody you know. If you see Andrew before me, say hi for me,
Oh yeah,
or vice versa. If I actually
or vice
get to go
versa.
somewhere with him, et cetera, it'd be great. So, no, the blessings to you, and thank you for taking the time to do this. I really
No,
appreciate
that's
it.
fine.
So, and this
No,
is
no,
and,
thank you.
and you did it in the middle of your holiday.
Yeah, it's a fun part of my holiday.
How many?
We can't really do too much anyway because well, due to the whole pandemic and that, it's kind of ruined a lot of things.
Well, thankfully in Ohio, this is where I'm from, they've dropped everything. So there's no more regulations or mandates or anything.
Yeah,
Everything's off.
yeah, that's good.
So we're all good and back to normal.
Yeah, we'll
Yep.
hopefully get there here.
Hopefully. Yeah. It sounds kind of like a mess over there.
Yeah, it's not great. I think the economy is going to be ruined for a long, long time.
Yeah. It wasn't our governor did a pretty good job. We were locked down for 2 weeks just at the beginning, but ever since then we were not locked down fully
Yeah,
since that was a year ago.
yeah,
So as a whole, the economy's actually been pretty good in
yeah.
Ohio.
That's good.
So
Yeah, I do wonder about how the whole West will survive, like whether this plays a role in the end times, the collapse of the world economy.
I think some of the precursors. So personally, I think the Middle East will become a prominent region,
Mm,
just based on what you read in Daniel, et cetera, that the power will shift off of the Western nations. Just personal opinion, because of the nations that keep coming up in prophecy
oh,
they're
okay.
all Middle Eastern nations.
Mm,
So just my opinion is you're going to probably see a decrease of the prominence of the West. Not saying they're going to disappear, but just their power will be taken away.
mm.
So, and of course, the power of the West is the dollar. So, or in your
Mm.
case, the pound.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for Britain, pound. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. End time prophecy. It's like I'm trying to imagine exactly how things will work out. Like from the Seventh Day Adventist understanding, it will have to be like led by America, but how that exactly works out, like I believe it's going to happen, but I don't know how. All the details, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure. I think, like in my mind, um, I see probably. I mean, just based on the language of the
Mm,
Bible. Of course, they were trying to describe modern things too, but you could build a case. I'll put it this way: you could
mm,
build a case that the world we know will disappear before the last days come. And what I mean
mm.
by that is the technological world. Um,
Okay.
you could build a case because what's being described is ancient tactics. And, you're back to horses and you're back to hand weapons and things like that.
Yeah.
What could cause that? EMPs. If you would have a crazy person, there's plenty of crazy people in this world that would start EMPing. They could totally knock down all the technology and instantly we'd be back several hundred years. All digital technology would be completely disrupted.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's something they're considering, obviously, because just locally here, my dad owns land where they have a 911 tower. It's like it's a cell phone tower. It's not a cell phone tower, but they have radio communications throughout the U.S. And they recently EMP proofed the equipment by the tower, so that if we would be EMP'd,
that's protected.
That would be protected, and that the government could still do coast-to-coast communication.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I've heard about it, like emergency broadcast sort of stuff. Anyway, so that could be something to do with that. I'm thinking. I'm
not a prepper, just FYI.
No.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist either.
No, that's something that you've heard anyway. Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
Fascinating. All right. Well, I've taken enough of your time, so thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And maybe sometime we can do another conversation. Or if I ever come to Scotland, I can say hello.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be good meeting you in person. It's always a better feeling when you see each other face to face. Well, we'll see face to face here, but it's not the same.
No, but we're thousands of miles apart, so we'll take it.
Yeah, so we can make do with this for now.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Yeah, thank you. God bless you too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.